Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about how a wild and colourful look defined the gangsters of the early 1920s. Now, this is in contrast to what you may have seen in old photographs. Well, mainly it's because they were in black and white, so it's kind of difficult to tell, obviously, what sort of colours people were wearing. But also that colour isn't traditionally seen as very masculine. And yet, these gangsters are rough, tough guys who wore bow ties and orange silk shirts and plaid suits. In many senses, they were dandies. Now, I don't use dandy in the 18th century context. Those dandies were pale, frail men that wore white linen. Now, I'm referring more to how it was used around 1910 to describe something fresh and new and exciting. The reason I'm going to focus my talk on Boardwalk Empire is because it features the most authentic, beautifully produced costumes I've ever seen, certainly for gentlemen, set during the 1920s, in film or television. I'm going to look at three characters in the show and explain how their clothing defines them as a gangster and their level of hierarchy in the criminal ladder. I'll also look at how costume on film has affected what real gangsters wear and vice versa. And also just a little bit about how the sort of fashion we have today, men's suit revival, really has been inspired by Boardwalk Empire. Okay, to start with, I need to look at the suit itself. Now, around 1900, your suit was called a sack suit, which is pretty much what this is. The reason it was called a sack suit is because, well, essentially it hung the body a bit like a sack. It wasn't necessarily fitted in any way. It had actually quite short tails, so that's quite long there. High, small lapels, normally 4 or 5 buttons at the front. It was fairly nondescript as far as suits go. Now, also around 1900, men were sort of, they were doing more activities. They were getting into sports more. So they were skiing and swimming. And also the Gillette safety razor was invented around this time. So you started to get a clear divide between the older generation that liked their cutthroat shave and the younger man that wanted the safety razor, and he was shaving off his tash and his beard and getting a slick back hair and everything like that. And because of this interest in sport, the male body got fitter. These guys got more athletic. So the suit sort of changed with them, it evolved. Now, around 1911, around about then, the suit had evolved to pretty much what you see here. Now this is actually an advert from a British paper, but I think it's from 1924. But that's actually very important because this particular look I'm talking about, obviously it came before the First World War and it kind of survived and became the sort of suit of type really in the 1920s. It's a lot slimmer suit, as you can see. It has darts pulling in the waist to make it slimmer, sloping shoulders. The trousers are narrow, very narrow actually, with turn-ups that fit just above the shoe, so very little break. And as you can see, it's generally it's a sort of narrow look, really. It had a name that's called the tapered line suit. That's what we refer to as a tapered line suit. Like I said, the reason it's so important is because it hung around after the First World War. To all intents and purposes, I'm going to call this the Boardwalk Empire suit, because this is kind of what you're going to be seeing. I mean, this isn't a great illustration, but I'll be showing you some better ones in a minute. So, the show itself. Now, this, for those who don't know, Boardwalk Empire is a crime drama set during it's an American crime drama TV series set during the early 1920s. It's about Prohibition. Now, Prohibition, of course, was America's attempt to curb the sale, consumption and transportation of alcohol. It failed, and what it actually did was give rise to probably the first big time of organised crime in America, particularly in places like Chicago and where Boardwalk Empire is set in Atlantic City. Now, this chap on the screen here is the main protagonist of the show. His name's Nucky Thompson, or Enoch Nucky Thompson. He starts off the series as county treasurer of Atlantic City, so he's got an official job, but on the side he also dabbles in a prostitution ring and a gambling ring, and eventually he gets involved in rum running and bootlegging. So after a while he can no longer continue in his proper job, and he becomes a gangster full time. You see a lovely gangster out there. Now, Nucky's actually based on a real-life character called Enoch Johnson. Johnson actually did run Atlantic City in much the same way as Nucky does throughout the 1920s and into the 30s. There aren't a lot of really good pictures of Enoch that exist, but one thing we do know about him is he was an ostentatious dresser, and he had a lot of money and he liked to show it off. He also had a fresh carnation in his lapel every single day. That was his trademark. And he had a powder blue chauffeur-driven Rolls Royce that he used to go around in. So yeah, it was all about showing the money. Now, interestingly, you can see the carnation there. You would assume it's probably white because of the photograph, but actually it was blood red. So this is kind of what I was saying before about the old black and white photos, not really telling us what these guys actually wore and the amount of colour. I mean, for all we know, he could have a pink shirt on and a red suit and a yellow tie or something. It's we don't know, that's the point. But research has been telling us that, yes, these guys did dress in more exciting clothing than we assumed. The costume designer at Boardwalk Empire is a man named John Dunn. Now, John Dunn is a veteran of the industry. He's worked in loads of movies, loads of films. He'd done a Casino with Martin Scorsese. He also done a pilot episode of Mad Men, so he kind of created the whole look for that show before Janie Bryant actually took over. Now, his costume all at Boardwalk Empire up to the 5th season we've got coming up now. The reason I'm putting this on, this is one of the costumes from the show. Again, it just kind of harks back to what I was saying before. You may well have seen an outfit like this in a 1920s or 1930s photograph and never realised the amount of colour that was involved in it, like the red waistcoat and the blue shirt. This is the kind of dandy look that I'm talking about. Really, I think probably the best way to sort of sum up what I'm talking about as a dandy gangster, the vibe that I'm talking about, is to show the opening credits of the show. Now, pay close attention to the little details. The shoes, the hat, the tie. All these parts are emblematic of the gangster. They make up a gangster's iconography, and they're very, very important. So that was Nucky Thompson, makes quite an impression. And this is Nucky Thompson. Now, this is a costume sketch that was given to me by John Dunn. And as far as I know, it's never been actually seen outside of his New York office. It's for Nucky Thompson, obviously. It's even got a fabric swatch on the side there, a couple of swatches on the side. What I really like about it, so it basically tells you his silhouette for the whole show. As you can see, it's a tapered line suit. The button placement is pretty high, which it would have been around 1920, which is when the show starts. And the buttons are close together. The shoulders are very narrow. He's even got like gauntlet cuffs there, and they turn back on the arm. Now those are kind of Edwardian, actually. So even though Nucky's into sort of modern fashions and showing off that he can afford them, he's not that young, so he kind of likes to hark back to the Edwardian age, which really, see, in the 1920s, it didn't just hit 1920 and become flappers and guys in regatta jackets running around like Gatsby. That didn't happen straight away. That's something that took off as the 20s did. So around 1920, when this show starts, that's kind of more the silhouette and the look that you would have seen. He tends to wear a plaid suit in the show, normally in pretty wild colours, and you can see there his shirt with the, it's like the orange coloured shirt like I mentioned before. And this is the man himself again. Now, what you can see here straight away is the sheer quality of these suits. Now, John Dunn really spent a lot of time researching suits from this period. He pored over fashion plates from the era. He went to the Brooklyn Museum, the Met Museum, and when he found these old tailor's patterns, he couldn't believe the sort of riotous colour that was stuck on them. He didn't really have any idea that this is going to be the type of clothing he was going to be representing in the show. Another thing was, he wanted the suits to have the correct weight, so the correct fabric. So he only used suiting that was available in the early 1920s. And what he couldn't find, which was pretty difficult in America, he had specially made in Scotland. So this is kind of like these suits aren't necessarily a great vintage buy now, because in our sort of centrally heated houses and stuff, they're absolutely boiling. One thing I really love about this, and just something else that shows you the quality, is look at the pattern matching. Now, what I'm talking about, if you look at the arm and the body of the suit, you can see the way the orange lines go down, they line up perfectly with the arm, all the way up the body, and on the other side, and the pocket as well. Now, that's flipping difficult to do. That's really tough to do for a tailored suit. It takes a long time, it requires a lot of fabric, because there tends to be mistakes made when it's done. But it's a beautiful finish. You see somebody walking around in a tailored suit where all of the lines match up, not like my cheap suit here tonight, but when they will actually match up, you know they've spent a lot of money on it. And this is kind of demonstrating what my suit's pretty much already done. This is Robert Redford in The Sting, which is set in the 20s. Actually, the costume designer of this was Edith Head, so we kind of assume you know what she's doing. But what I want you to point out is just how appalling this suit is compared to and just look at the way the lines don't match up in the slightest there, on the shoulder and the body, and also on the other side as well. Frankly, the whole suit is kind of bizarre in silhouette, to be honest with you. But I'm more saying that I'm not so much saying that this is terrible costume design, I'm more saying that the costume design in Boardwalk Empire is exceptional. So the second character I want to talk about, this is Jimmy Darmody. Now, Jimmy Darmody was a young man, obviously, come back from the war, full of ambition, wanted to make money. So he went to work for Nucky as his driver/bodyguard. Actually, he's one of the few characters on the show that was completely made up. He had absolutely sort of no link to anyone in real life. But the reason I'm so interested in him is because he has a real costume arc that occurs because he becomes a gangster and starts to dress that way. As you can see here, what he's wearing, he's got tweeds, a bit of flannel, some knitwear. This would be considered pretty scruffy for the period. Well, maybe not scruffy, but more workwear. This would show you whereabouts he is on the hierarchy at the moment as far as being a gangster is concerned. Of course, ironically enough, you saw a young man wearing this now, you think how incredibly smart he is. But back then, it was just another fella walking around with a tweed suit. This was his look for the early episodes of the show, at least the first sort of 5, 6 episodes. And he also used to wear one of these. Now, you can't really see that jacket that well. For some reason, I couldn't get a better picture out of HBO, but it's called a Norfolk coat. Now, I love these things, and as far as I know, they haven't had a proper revival. So, if anyone out there's got some money, wants to make it happen, I'm seeing if we can do this. It's essentially a sporting jacket, sporting coat. You can see it's got a belt there. Sometimes it would have a half belt, sometimes it would go all the way around. The idea is obviously pull the waist in as tight as it can, so the skirt would sort of flare out underneath. Most of them also had a box pleat as well on the back, so when you went, say, shooting, you'd lift your arm up like that and the fabric wouldn't bind under your arm. It was a practical coat, it was an early sports coat. It was around before the 20s, definitely. It was a Victorian coat, really, but it did hang around in most ways till the sort of 1930s. Sort of died out after that. This obviously is a fashion plate. This is actually from this is 1900. This again just shows you the Norfolk coat that I love so much.
What I think is great is if you look at the little fella up there, he's going along on his bike, happy as Larry. Look at him, look at say when his skirt just flares out over the saddle. It's such a practical garment to wear. Really, what this is an early tracksuit. It's an early tracksuit. So, when you think of it in that context, what Jimmy's wearing when he's guarding Nucky is essentially a tracksuit top. You know, he's walking around in this Norfolk coat, which essentially is a zip-up hoodie. And all of a sudden, you can see how scruffy he may appear. Now that is until he moves to Chicago. Now, he moves to Chicago to try and prove himself as a gangster. And one of the first things he does when he gets there is get himself a tailored suit. Now, this is a very modern styled suit. In fact, there's no reason why you couldn't wear this suit now, none at all. In fact, the only thing that probably ages it would be the higher waist of the trousers. Apart from that, it's pretty much perfectly wearable now. It's got it's a 3 to 2 button placement. It's quite low. It's very narrow, sloping shoulders again, and even the colour, which is a sort of dark blue with a white overcheck, it's pretty contemporary. It's probably bigger in the 90s, but you can still wear it now. It's a beautiful suit. Now, when he gets this suit, you've got to consider at this particular point in the story, he's moved to Chicago, but he doesn't have any money, really. He lives in one room in a brothel. He doesn't really have any material possessions, certainly no car. And there was nothing actually wrong with his clothes before, they weren't falling to pieces. It's just that they didn't project the right image. No one was going to take him seriously as a gangster unless he started dressing like a gangster. He had to give off that impression that he was going somewhere. Now this is obviously Jimmy and Nucky together. The reason I like this, in fact I'm just going to mention the pattern matching again. I'm obsessed with it, just look at it, it's absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, this is, what they're both wearing here is 2 different types of shirt, which I'd like to mention. Now, the 1920s was kind of there was a war in the 1920s between the stiff collared shirt and the soft collared shirt. The older gentleman preferred his stiff collar, which had been around for a while. It's a detachable stiff collar, that's what Nucky's wearing there. And the younger man obviously preferred the more comfortable soft collar. That's essentially like any shirt you would see now. The reason the older gentlemen didn't like them apparently is because they thought it would inspire a sort of slovenly poor posture in younger men. And it seems kind of ridiculous, but when you look here, they're actually kind of right. You've got Nucky there on the right, standing there very upright and very, very confident. And then there's Jimmy sort of slouched a little bit next to him, his hands in his pockets, looking a little bit like a moody teenager. So, in a way, they were kind of right. Of course, this isn't a historical photo, it's just one from the show, but it's an interesting point they made, and maybe it was actually true. Now, really in contrast to both of these guys is the last character I want to talk about. Now, this particular man has to be seen more than anybody else in Boardwalk Empire. This is Chalky White. Fantastic Chalky White. Now, Chalky White is obviously, he's a minority. He was the unofficial leader of the African American community in Atlantic City, the unofficial leader. He is also a businessman, a very successful businessman, not necessarily legit, but he's a businessman, made himself a lot of money. But to be noticed, he has to give off the vibe that he's got more money and more success than anybody else, mainly because of his race. So he achieves this with a really wild use of fabric and pattern and colour. Even those suits, you can see it's very sort of Edwardian style suit. The jacket's actually rather long. So it's kind of like he subverts the old look. He's kind of like wearing their suits his way, if you understand what I mean. This is a costume sketch, one that John Dunn gave to me. As far as I know, again, it's never been seen outside of his New York office. And this is obviously the Chalky White. And you can see very much his silhouette here. This is pretty much how he looks throughout the whole show. His sort of clothing gets a little bit quieter now at this particular point in the show because the story's got a bit darker, but really they always try and keep this kind of dandy vibe with him. Obviously he's got the long red coat there with the fur collar, normally wears a tweed suit, and always a bow tie, that's his thing, that's his iconography, if you like, and the white brim hat. Now, when I first looked at this, immediately what I thought of is that Chalky kind of reminds me of the blaxploitation gangsters of the 1970s. So in films like sharp than Superfly, that kind of thing. It's a sort of exaggerated silhouette with a wide floppy hat. I actually put this to John Dunn. I asked him, you know, is that a conscious thing? And he said it wasn't necessarily a conscious thing, but because so much of men's fashion in the 1970s especially was inspired by the 20s and 30s, yes, he was kind of a sort of precursor to that. But really, John Dunn saw him more as a precursor to the zoot suit wearers of the early 1940s. So, like, they tended to be worn by African-American jazz musicians, like Cab Calloway, people like that. They had a very long jacket on, and like peg-top trousers that come all the way down like that. It was a very political suit, actually. I haven't really had time to go into it here, but it's a very political suit, and so is Chalky's inclusion in the show, really. So there is a kind of a nice connection. Somebody else, or another subculture that Chalky reminded me of when I was looking at these pictures and the ones in the show, is one that's it's centuries old, actually, this particular subculture, but it's currently getting a lot more press thanks to a recent advertisement for a very popular drinks company. I'm going to show you the advert now and explain a little bit more.
In life, you cannot always choose what you do, but you can always choose who you are. Ain't nothing wrong with this chemistry. Ain't nothing wrong with this best on you. Ain't time to tell the test of pedigree. Experience is a little wrong live on you. We are the suckers. The society of elegant persons of the Congo. You see, my friends, with every praise and every conflict, we say, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
Those men are African dandies, the Congo sailors, or what is it said, the Society of Tastemakers and Elegant People. Now, they date back to around the 18th century, and it was when African slaves were brought over and dressed in elegant clothing so they could fit in with their master's surroundings. Obviously, these ones that were lucky enough not to be put into a plantation field. Now, when slavery was abolished, a lot of these men actually kept hold of these clothes and the sort of ethos behind them, the elegant thing. And they adapted them and refined them, and it's kind of, through the centuries, it became the African dandies you see now. I mean, this is Chalky on screen again, and you can see his red coat actually, from the costume sketch. It's actually far redder in the show, so he's even brighter and more exciting than he was on the paper. But he does remind me of the African dandies, because they're a subculture, and he's part of a subculture. And he's wearing clothes of the people that essentially have oppressed his people for centuries, and yet he subverts it and makes it his own, exactly like the African dandies did. Finally, I want to have a little look at how real-life gangsters were inspired by gangsters on screen and vice versa. Now, this is John Dillinger. Now, Dillinger was a bank robber / gangster. This photograph's taken in 1933. Dillinger was a sort of movie star gangster, if you like. He was one of the first. He liked having his photo taken, a bit of a poser. Can relate to that myself. He spent a lot of money on suits, and just generally he wanted to give off that kind of successful vibe. Now, apparently his whole sort of crime spree was inspired by movies. One movie in particular called The Public Enemy, which was released in 1931 and starred James Cagney as a sort of sharp-suited gangster. And apparently Cagney based his character in the film on a real-life character called, a real-life gangster, sorry, called Dino Banyan. Now, Dino Banyan was a real-life gangster he actually turns up in Boardwalk Empire, but he was a real-life gangster who was prolific in the 20s. And he was known for his flash suits as well. In fact, he had fancy tailored suits made with extra pockets so he could hide all his guns without bulging out the silhouette. That's kind of how much he was into himself. Now, there is kind of a sort of, it's like a paradox really, sort of chicken and egg situation. Because you've got essentially there with Cagney, you've got art imitating life, imitating art. You know, it's kind of like it's very difficult to work out which came first in many respects. But by the 1930s really, real life gangsters were very much copying what they saw on screen. And of course, ironically enough, the characters on screen were based on real life gangsters. So you kind of had this whole circle going around. It was very difficult to see where one ended and one began. Now, the actual gangster look kind of has a real cliche thing behind it now. It's this sort of visual shorthand for gangster. I can imagine that you've probably got an image in your mind of what that would be. Well, I tapped in 1920s gangster costume into Google, and this is what I got. Yeah, there it is. Fairly ridiculous, but kind of what I was expecting. To start with, he's more of a 30s gangster. We're not going to get into that anymore. But it's the colour thing. Again, it's based on like a black and white perception of gangsters from this time, not in the fact that they like to show off their money and their wealth. I mean, their wealth and their power and their status in the hierarchy of the criminal ladder. I mean, this white tie thing, you know, we would see it in the photographs and assume it's white, it's probably yellow or something, the suit could have been purple. It's, you know, we didn't know, but now thanks to shows like Boardwalk Empire, and it's digging out this old research, that we're starting to understand that these gangsters really were very much like dandies. That's what a gangster looked like. Now, just any excuse and another picture of Chalky. And again, look at the pattern. Absolutely stunning. But see, this is the kind of thing I've been talking about. This is really the legacy of the show. It's shown us what gangsters did actually wear during this period, and it's seeped over into the world of fashion as well. So you've got, this is a Ralph Lauren advert from I think 2 years ago, and you can see there it's the check suit. I think he's got two-tone shoes on, or they're just, I'm not sure if they're two, but anyway, he's got the collar bar like Nucky wears. He's also got the long coat with the fur collar and a car. It's a kind of 20s, 30s vibe. It's very much inspired by Boardwalk Empire. It's definitely that kind of look. Here as well, you've got, this is actually Ralph Lauren, I think from last year. Obviously this is women's wear, and arguably it looks even better on a woman than it does on a guy, but it just shows you how that look doesn't necessarily need to be gender specific. One thing I really like here as well is the pocket square in the puff style. Now, the whole reason for wearing a pocket square is it's really supposed to represent a flower, because no one really wears flowers in their lapels anymore unless they're at a wedding. So it's kind of a nice way of adding a burst of colour to a suit. And what I really like here is the way that this is red, which is the same as Nucky's blood red carnation. Got a little bit of symbolism in there. I've got to get a little bit of symbolism in. Now this is actually a Bond Street bow. This isn't way back before, but again, it sums up what I'm talking about. It's that whole thing about being proud to display your wealth and almost be a tad effeminate. And that's kind of how I want to round things out, because well, this is going to sound like a generalisation, and it is, but it's kind of true. Now, there's a school of thought that says if a woman's say trying on a dress, and a shop assistant would say to her, "Wow, you know, no one's got that dress. That's fantastic." "Oh, really? No one's got it? Fantastic. I want it." Now, if it's a guy, say, trying on, for example, a suit, he'll be putting a suit on, and a shop assistant says to him, "Oh yeah, all the guys have got that." So, "Oh, they all got it, fantastic, now I want it." It's like they need permission to wear anything that's exciting, and I think that's what Boardwalk Empire has done, because these are gangsters, you know, rough, tough blokes kicking arse all day, and they're wearing pink shirts and very colourful suits, that it's kind of legitimised this look for men. And because this was what real gangsters wore as well, they thought, well, okay, if these guys have got it on, I can wear it as well. And I think, to me, that is the absolute legacy of Boardwalk Empire. It's brought this sort of dandy dressing back to men's fashion. Now, I'm just about finished, but there are actually a few books that I use for my research and I would recommend. Stupidly, I didn't actually write them down so you can see what they are, but I can maybe tell you in a talk afterwards or come and speak to me and I'll explain them. But that's me done. So.